Hi, guys. Welcome back to Infinite Possibilities, the podcast where we explore the lives of amazing people, their choices, challenges, and opportunities. And today I have a very special guest, Paul Lawrence. Thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure.
So, Paul, what is your kind of 1-minute introduction about what you do?
Well, I work in the coaching and leadership development space, and I do a lot of research and writing in that space. I live in Sydney, in Pyrmont. I've got 4 kids and 2 cats.
Oh, very nice. A bit of an animal lover, right? Okay, so we'll just go from the beginning, see how Paul got to where he is now. So, Paul, what kind of child were you like growing up?
What sort of child was I? I spent most of my time, we grew up when I was at primary school in a pretty small village in Sussex in England.
Oh.
And I spent most of my time playing football whenever I could.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
And what about in terms of personality? If I were to meet you when you were in primary school, how would I describe your personality?
Sorry, did you say primary school or high school?
Oh, no. And I was talking about personality. Okay, I guess maybe like a little bit in primary school and high school. What kind of personality did you sort of have?
Look, I think I was quite bullish and, as I say, run around and as little boys do. At home, I was quite quiet. The house that I grew up in was quite a quiet household. Both my parents had quite traumatic childhoods themselves. So it was quite a quiet childhood. I have one brother. Again, so it was at home pretty quiet, and say when I was at school and out of the house, much more lively.
Oh, okay. That's quite interesting. And so at that time when you were young in high school and you were thinking about like the future and a career, was there anything like running through your mind? If so, what kind of stuff?
I didn't think an awful lot about career when I was at high school. And part of that was, as I say, my dad was a fairly anxious individual and he worked in corporate. And so my image of working in corporate wasn't a very rosy one because it was largely determined by his own kind of behaviors. So kind of knew what I didn't want to do, which was to work in an office and get on a train and commute to work every day. I don't think I really knew what I wanted to do. I remember when I was probably before high school, but my grandmother asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up, and I said I wanted to be retired, which I think meant I just wanted to go and do whatever I wanted to do. But towards the end of high school, again, I wasn't very planful. It was more about what am I enjoying here? And my favourite subject at school was biology, or at least the zoology side of it. At one point, I was thinking about becoming a vet. And so I went and started doing zoology at uni because it was just an interesting subject. I wasn't thinking at all about what I wanted to do.
Oh, that's kind of interesting. And then just wanted to talk a little bit about your father. So you said he had a corporate job. So what kind of corporate job was it? And what was your impression? Because I'd like to later contrast to it to what you've sort of seen in the world for yourself.
Well, he worked in a managerial role for a company at the time. He started working in a place that was sort of in a suburb of London, and then he worked in London. This was when I was really at primary school, probably early high school, and he didn't really talk about what he did, but he just came home every day looking very stressed. So I thought, well, that can't be much fun. So I'm not going to do that.
And am I allowed to ask about what your mother did, if she like worked or?
Yeah, my mum worked. She was a teacher. She was a high school teacher. In fact, I spent a year working in her, being a student in her class. So she taught English and Latin.
Oh, interesting. And so did you ever consider like the teacher route? Was there anything like appealing seeing your mum's work?
I did actually. I applied to become a teacher, and they offered me a place, and then I turned it down basically because every teacher that I knew was telling me don't become a teacher, because you don't get paid very much money. And ultimately, that's probably why I didn't become a teacher, because I wanted to get out, and I just wanted to get out and travel. And the first job I did get was working for BP, and what they offered me was come and work for us for a year in London, and then we'll send you somewhere overseas. So that was, I don't think that was ever going to happen as a teacher. So I was attracted by the teaching side of it, and that's probably why I do quite a lot of teaching or facilitating still now.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's go to when you first started uni. So you were sort of majoring in zoology, and then how was the experience, and like why did you then later decide to add like psychology to the mix?
Well, you have to remember uni in those days in England was very different to uni in certainly in Australia. You had your tuition fees were all paid for you. It didn't matter who you were, your tuition fees were all paid. And you also got a means tested living grant as well. So you got a grant to pay for your accommodation and or your expenses. And so you went and you lived away. So to be honest, what I was looking forward most from uni was 3 years of just enjoying myself. And that's kind of what I did. But again, the psychology piece I was just interested in it. When in year one, you needed to do a second subject, and I chose psychology just because it sounded interesting. And when I did a year of it, it was more interesting than the zoology. I could have dropped the zoology, but instead I just decided to do a joint degree. But yeah, the reason I chose psych was because I just really found it very interesting. I mean, I think I chose zoology because I found animals interesting. People are a bit more complex than animals, and so that's why I went for psych, I think.
And has there been sort of any kind of does one degree feed into the other, as in does psychology sort of help you a little bit with zoology, or zoology help a little bit with psychology, like any sort of kind of unfair advantage that maybe you had over someone just purely studying psychology or not?
Well, you didn't have an advantage because if you did a joint degree, you ended up doing 50% more work than the people who did a single degree. So there wasn't much of an advantage. I guess so. I mean, but not. I wouldn't say significantly. Not in academic terms. I mean, when you do a psych degree, the questions they ask you in the exams are about the course that you just did. So, I think I don't think there was a significant advantage.
Yeah, fair enough. And then after doing, also I had a question. Most people that I know that study psychology, it's mainly to understand themselves. So would you say that it was sort of coming from that kind of place, or were there other sort of reasons?
I think you're well. If you're doing psych, it's because you're interested in people, and so that's yourself and that's others. I'm not sure I went in there to do kind of self-analysis or anything like that because I never did. I actually think no, I was more interested in people generally and how they function, including me. But it wasn't. I didn't go in there to do a kind of self-exploration piece.
Yeah, fair enough.
I know what you mean. I later did a degree in counselling and psychotherapy, and a lot of people on that course, for sure, were going there to understand themselves.
Yeah, fair. And then, so after doing a bachelor's, what made you decide to sort of do a PhD and explore psychology further?
Well, when I finished my degree, I had no idea what I wanted to do, and yeah, I knew what I wanted to do. I went on holiday. Actually, I went on holiday with a load of friends for 2 weeks, and then came back and thought, well, what am I going to do now? And I just rang around. I rang around the one of my lecturers in psychology. I went to uni in Durham and said, yeah, I haven't really got much to do. And he said, well, I can connect you with this guy in Newcastle, and he might give you a job. So I went to Newcastle and worked as a lab technician for a year, and then found that was a little bit boring, and thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I might as well do a PhD. And so I applied to do a PhD, applied and got offered places, and yeah, did it again out of interest. There was no long-term plan. yeah, it just felt like an interesting thing to do. When I was doing the degree, the PhD, probably about a year and a half in, I realised that this isn't for me. It's very intense, not very kind of peoply. And as it happened, the body that was sponsoring my PhD offered us all to go to was it a week or a weekend? I can't remember, but this introduction to corporate management stuff. And I went to that and actually quite enjoyed it. And so off the back of that, went and applied for a load of corporate roles in marketing. As I said, with one eye on joining a company where I could work overseas.
Oh, so after your PhD, you went straight into marketing?
After the PhD, yes, pretty much. And then I started work for BP about 2 weeks after I finished my PhD.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Although I didn't end up doing marketing. But yeah, in the end, no, joined. So that was a general management kind of, it was like a global graduate scheme. But yeah, I started that 2 weeks after I finished the PhD.
And so when you did a PhD, there was never really the view that you want to be a professor, or because I imagine like your other colleagues, they probably didn't go into marketing like you did, or what kind of were the other sort of job prospects at that time?
Well, the obvious thing to do would have been, I don't know that you go in there thinking you'd be a professor. I think it's more about, because it's very much a kind of research-based thing. So what I would have done, I think, is gone and looked for research-based jobs in the US. But the field of psychology that I'd gotten into, I'd sort of wandered into, wasn't a field that I was particularly interested in. And so, as I said, I fairly early on made the decision that I needed to shift into something different.
Oh, and what was that particular field that you were in?
I was looking at Alzheimer's disease, causes of Alzheimer's disease.
Oh, wow, that's extremely niche. Yeah.
Whatever you do is a PhD.
Yeah, and PhD is super niche. Yeah. And then, so when you're working at BP, what was that experience like? And did you have an expectations versus reality per se?
My expectation was to enjoy myself, really. And I was looking for something that was going to be interesting. And so, like I said, the first year was in London. It was a bit of a grind, because the London office was tended to be the really experienced people in the organization doing strategy and so on. And so when you went in as a graduate, you didn't necessarily have a lot to add in that space. You were more there as a bit of a gopher doing bits of analysis and what have you. But the benefit of that was you got to see how the head office, fairly small centralized head office of an organization worked. And that was interesting. As I said, on a day-to-day level, it wasn't kind of full of thrills, but it was interesting from that perspective. And they did a lot of training. I mean, they had all of these courses on, which tended to be sort of 3-4 day courses on all aspects of the way that BP was operating. So not just marketing, but supply and trading and financial and what have you. So it was a time for learning. And you were just kind of waiting to see where it's a bit like, was it like you were just kind of waiting to see what country you'd get sent to do your next job.
Oh, and what kind of work was it like on a daily basis? Because you said you were doing operations. So what kind of?
No, it wasn't an operations job. It was working in a global head office. So half the floor was really data analysis.
Oh.
And the other half was marketing. I kind of got put in the data analysis side, which wasn't in itself what I wanted to do. But as I said, in the context of just getting to know how these places worked was interesting. So the day-to-day stuff was and data analysis, basically.
Wow, that's kind of crazy. So you had to pretty much learn that all from scratch, like, doing psych. But psychology does, I guess, doing a PhD, that data analysis, you sort of had a bit of the skill set.
Yeah, this wasn't particularly sophisticated data analysis. It was spreadsheets and what have you. So I mean, I did maths at school, and as you say, it was a quantitative research thing. So I was perfectly at home with sort of numbers and spreadsheets and analysis and what have you. So it wasn't particularly taxing work. It wasn't particularly exciting work, but I worked in a little office with 4 or 5 other people. It was an opportunity to get to know people and explore, and from that side of it, it was fun. And you knew you were only going to be doing it for a year.
Yeah, that's cool. And then how did you decide to stay for so long? Because you stayed for like 9 years or so. And how was that travel experience? Did you sort of, I guess the travel bug out of you, or yeah?
Well, I wasn't. I was there for longer than that. Actually, I was there for about.
Yeah.
I was at BP for about 14 years. But
Wow.
that sounds like a long time. And if you think about somebody sitting at the same desk in an office for 14 years, but that just wasn't what it was like. It was. Most of my jobs were 2 or 3 years, and most of them were in different countries, working in very different places with different people. So it felt very much like what it was. It was going from company to company. So, I started in the head office. I went to Australia. So that was BP Australia. I came back and worked for BP UK for 18 months. I worked for BP in Spain for about 3.5 years. I worked for BP in Portugal for 18 months. I worked for BP in Japan for about 3 years, coming back to the head office. So you were going kind of company to company. It wasn't like you were really like staying in the same company, other than you kind of knew how it worked, and you kind of knew what you were a part of. So it was sort of halfway between being in the one company, I think, and just shifting between different companies.
Yeah, and was that sort of standard for the people at the time, that they would do 1 or 2 years in various different countries, or that was just mainly kind of like how you decided to do it?
Well, no, each company was its own company. I mean, if you think about KPMG Australia, it's its own company.
Yeah.
If you join KPMG Australia, I'm sure a lot of people just work at KPMG Australia, and some people are lucky enough to have the opportunity to go and work for other KPMG companies abroad, and that's kind of what it's like at BP. But the scheme that I joined originally, the Global Graduate Scheme, which I was lucky to join, was that said, yeah, you'll work for us in head office for 12 months, then we will send you overseas and then see what happens. And that's what happened. I mean, I wasn't guaranteed work overseas other than the first posting. But what I found after that was I was very keen to move overseas and travel around, whereas a lot of people weren't. It's a bit of a myth that everybody wants to travel. I mean, they don't. A lot of people want to stay put. And so those of us that once you've been overseas a couple of times, then you've got the experience of working overseas, which makes you even more attractive for jobs overseas. So it's a bit of a kind of spiraling thing.
Yeah, that's cool. And then you said you stayed there for around 14 years. So how did you decide when you wanted to leave, and etc.?
Well, it was natural progression, I think, because within BP, I started in the head office. I did want to do, as I said, I got put in the analysis side. I was more interested in the marketing side. And what did we do then? And I did a degree, postgraduate diploma in marketing through the Chartered Institute of Marketing. And when did I do that? I think I started that
1990.
1990, right. So that would have been shortly after. So I went to Australia.
Yeah.
Worked in the Brisbane office. That was an ops job, and that was a great job because I was looking at, it was the ops jobs in the retail business are just brilliant jobs for like getting early leadership experience, because it's like first job, second job, and you're leading people already. And then when I moved back to the UK, I finished off I was doing my marketing diploma, and then got a job. And so, as I said, the ops job, it was an ops job in Australia. It was working in a franchise environment, came back to the UK, built them a franchise, then went to Spain, where I was leading the whole company-owned retail business over there, plus building a new franchise business over there, whilst I was doing my MBA.
Wow.
So all that doing that distance learning was a brilliant way to do it, because or why, not necessarily distance learning, but doing it while you were working was brilliant. And so got into the marketing side through that. The Portugal job was a marketing job. The Japan job was a general management job, leading a new retail business over there in Tokyo. So BP was great because I was able to, move quickly whilst learning new things, which is really important to me, in new places, which was just pretty wonderful. Then when I got back to so when I was in Japan, I decided I really wanted to focus on the sort of people side and taught myself into this global leadership development job. And so that's what I was doing. But at the same time, I was having children. So we had 4 children. One was born in UK, one was born in Spain, one was born in Portugal, one was born in Japan. And so I got to that stage where you go, right, now we need to settle somewhere. So really the work side of it stopped being kind of the primary criterion. And we looked back at everywhere we've been and we thought, because at that time in BP, the most likely thing would have happened is I'd have done a London job in the head office in London and probably in mergers and acquisitions. And I'm not sure that was what I wanted. Well, I was sure that wasn't what I wanted to do. As I said, I'd moved into this global leadership development job. That would have been staying in England. And we didn't want to bring the kids up in England, not in sort of London and the suburbs. Nothing against people who bring their kids up in London and the suburbs. It wasn't what we wanted to do. So we migrated permanently to Australia in 2003. And that was because this is the place we wanted to bring up kids. And so we brought all our kids up here. That was and stopped really traveling. And so, yeah, that was a big transition. When you have kids, the world changes, right?
Yeah. And your focus shifts. And so at that time, were you, when you knew that you wanted to settle in Australia and then you were like, I guess, resign from your BP role, did you first like secure a job in Australia before coming, or you just came and you were like, oh, we'll figure it out? Kind of.
Well, we said we're just going to come. We're just going to figure it out. But what happened was BP was really nice to me, and they, actually, what happened was, so I was leading this global leadership development program, and I knew the guy in Australia, and I said, look, I'll come and help you deliver that program. BP said, yeah. And while I was over here, I just extended it and went and chatted to a few people about jobs, and I was very lucky. So we thought, well, if we haven't got a job, we'll go to Melbourne, because I quite liked Melbourne, and Melbourne at the time was cheaper than Sydney, and we faced the prospect of coming over here without a job. So, which isn't a little thing when you got 4 kids. But then shortly before, I think it's about 3 or 4 weeks before we were due to come over, I got offered a job in Sydney. So I think everything had already gone on the boat at that point, but this boat was going to Sydney and then Melbourne, so that was all right. So yeah, I got a job just before we came over as COO of Hoyt's, the cinema chain, working in Sydney. Yeah.
Oh, and how was that experience of being COO?
It was sort of unofficial COO. It's because Hoyt's was a small company. Still is a small company. I mean, it's got its head office in Sydney. It's got a national cinema network. It's not a big company compared to BP. I mean, it's tiny. So what was it like? Well, what you have to, probably the biggest context piece is it was owned by Jamie Packer at the time. Jamie Packer had bought it, not sure why, to be honest, but he was looking for, because cinema industry, it's not an obvious one for growth, because as a cinema company, what you do is you own real estate. Well, you don't own real estate. Basically, what you do is when new shopping centres are going up, you go in there and you grab the cinema bit. You don't make films. You pay a fee to show the films, and that's what you do. So it's actually a very simple business conceptually. Jamie Packer bought it and wanted to make money out of it, and it wasn't making a lot of money. And the way that his company worked was, if you weren't making the money, then you were under the microscope, and that wasn't a terribly pleasant place to be. If you were making money, you just got totally left alone. So in that period, we weren't making a lot of money. So I got to experience a very different culture to the one that I'd experienced at BP. And some of the things that happened and some of the ways that the thing was run didn't do a lot for me. So I left after about 18 months.
Yeah. Interesting. And then how did you later transition into more kind of the work that you do now? Like you went into consulting.
Yeah, well,
how was that pathway?
Well, the transition really happened when I was at BP. As I said, I worked in a lot of, I worked in Spain, Portugal, Japan. What they all had in common was these were new business startups, turnaround businesses. And if you're starting a new business or you're turning a business around, you have to get the people side right. I think anyone would say you got to get the people side right, but if you don't get the people side right in a small business, your business falls over, depending on what role they're in. But if you're working in a retail business and you need new stores and your store man, the guy finding the stores isn't very good, then you haven't got a business. I mean, it's so the people side of it. And when I was working at Japan, they sort of grouped us together in these kind of peer groups. You did a lot of kind of peer review on how businesses were going. And we were in a peer group of other, for BP, were startup and turnarounds, like China and Poland. It wasn't kind of region specific. And some of those businesses didn't work. So, and I think the general interest there in the people side of it was that's why I was choosing psychology subjects early on. So that's how I managed to, because you could do this in a company like BP, I managed to transition over into the leadership development space because they were looking for somebody to head up the leadership development piece who wasn't a OD or expert in leadership development, was someone who could basically liaise with the business, because you needed to kind of market that program within the company. And to market the program in the company, you've got to be able to understand the kind of mindset of the folks that you're trying to market it to. So it's a beautiful opportunity for me because I got in there without having that OD or leadership development background. Well, I had the leadership development background as a leader, but I didn't have the kind of theoretical background. And so when we migrated over here, I wanted to stay in the same space, but that wasn't easy. And the Hoyts role that wasn't necessarily what I was looking for, but it was something that I'd done before. Because as I say, they were trying to grow cinema chains and they were doing things like, how do you maximize your non-film income, like candy bar stuff. That's a big part of what you do in a service station retail, is how do you maximize your non-fuel income. So, but then that was an opportunity to get back into what I really wanted to do, get back on that people development path. Wasn't easy to do in Australia. Australia's at that time anyway, it's really quite conservative into they look at your CV, and if you haven't done 10 years of the subject that you're applying for, then they don't look at you. So it wasn't easy, but I got a job at St. George looking after, it was HR, it was like a business partner role, actually, a sort of senior business partner role, but which I learned, again, wasn't really what I wanted to do. But within St. George, transitioned from that within about 18 months into heading up their leadership development and learning function, which was back where I wanted to be. What happened then was St. George eventually got sort of bought by Westpac, but that took quite a long time. And during that period, there was no investment in leadership development, what have you. So again, there was nothing for me to do there. So I left and started up my own business, and that was 2007. So about 15 years ago.
Wow. And what was that business about? What was its name? And how hard was it to, I guess, start your own business when you said you had like 4 kids? Was there like a kind of perceived high risk to it, or just because you've been in the industry for a while, then you were fine?
Of course there's a perceived high risk to it, but that's kind of not the way I look at it, I suppose. I mean,
that's pretty cool.
Well, if you think about it, this is the thing, you see, when you set up business for yourself, people say, I prefer the security of working for a company. But my own experience of that over the last 15 years, I know lots of people who've been made redundant and what have you. You got all your eggs in one basket. Once you've got yourself established as running your own business, and you've got 3, 4, 5 clients, those clients shift and change, but they only change one at a time. So unless something really mega happens, it's you honestly, I mean, I'm not sure I'd ever accept another job in corporate again, because I've actually got security. You work for an organization, all your eggs in one basket. My eggs are typically in 4 or 5 baskets at the same time. So I actually feel much more, I feel at least as secure in running my own business as I do part of an organization. And the other thing is, things do work out. Things do work out. I mean, over the years, I know lots of people who've been made redundant, what have you, and you guess what? 6 months later, they're all fine and typically happier. It's that transition is a bit unknown and a bit scary, but you can't be, how do you want to live your life, really? And if you live your life just doing the things that feel safest, then I wonder, you only get one life.
Yeah. And so how did that kind of idea first pop into your mind at first? Like, starting your own business doesn't come overnight. Was it through seeing other people do it, or just wanting that extra freedom, security?
I certainly didn't do it because I wanted security. I think I did it because it felt like where I wanted to go and do next, and based on and feeling pretty confident I'd be able to do a good job. And again, it's about just picking your moments. When I was doing the leadership development thing at St. George, we built a whole new leadership development program, which was pretty cool. And it was somewhat leading edge. And one of the things that, as part of that and putting that all together, as I said, it then got put in hold when the whole Westpac thing was going on. But one of the companies I was talking to was a coaching company, they don't exist anymore, called White & Co, led by Anne White, who is no longer with us. So I was getting them all sorted to do work at St. George. And then when I chose to left, I just had another chat with them and said, let's just shift the conversation here. How about I come and do some coaching for you? Not as an employee, that's contract work. And they said, yeah. And so I can't even remember what my company was called at the time, but mostly what I was doing was contract work, coaching work through White Co. And then I did probably about half my time. The other half the time I was doing leadership assessment work for a company called PDI, US company, who subsequently got bought out by Korn Ferry. But so that's what I was doing. It was setting up my own company, but initially I was doing contract work through those 2 organizations, which is actually a relatively easy way to, go it alone, as it were.
Yeah, but that's a pretty nice kind of transition. You didn't go straight into starting my own company. It was kind of smooth when you had your foot in sort of both waters, and then slowly kind of retracted out of the contract work into your own kind of work.
It's a good way to do it. I mean, I was teaching coaching, a master's coaching program at Sydney Business School, and what a lot of people do when they finish that program, the coaching program, is they go and build a website and then go looking for clients. That's an easy thing to do. I mean, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, and coaching is no different to any other industry. A lot of people like the idea of coaching because it feels really quite easy and nice, easy. I'll just go and coach other people, but it's a very competitive industry. And so if you just start out from scratch and you don't know the market, then you've got to have a really good marketing strategy, and most coaches don't have a particularly good marketing strategy. What I did by doing that contract work through my own company was I got a lot of experience. I got a lot of work very early on, which enabled me to really develop my skills as an external coach, helped me to get to know the market, helped me build client relationships, and it's a pretty good way to start off, I think.
Yeah, that's pretty smart. And then did you go on to start other kind of companies? Because I was looking at your LinkedIn and it says the Center for Systemic Change, and then later the Center for Coaching in Organizations. So how did you started your first company, which you can't remember, and then how did you sort of subsequently started a few other ones, or what happened?
Well, as I say, I've been working in the market. I won't remember my timings, but from 2007, I worked in the market and really, I mean, I am a very curious person. And so I got to know, I got experience and started doing a lot of research and writing in the coaching space, which also helps to build up your brand.
Yeah.
And so just got to a stage where some of the things I then wanted to do weren't things that Whiteco wanted to do or others wanted to do. So I just started up a company with a friend. We started up a company called Centre for Systemic Change. I'd say we've been in the market long enough by that point to be able to get clients of our own. And I stayed there for about 2 or 3 years, I think. Got to a point where, and then 2 of us became 8 of us because we formed a kind of cooperative. But then it just got to a point where what I wanted to do next wasn't necessarily what they wanted to do next. And so I formed a Centre for Coaching and Organisations with a couple of colleagues. And I still do some work with them. But again, I'd spent a lot of time in the coaching space. I really wanted to focus on the leadership space. And so formed Leading Systemically, which I'm running just by myself at the moment. But I still keep, I still do some work with CCO as well. But it's all about knowing what it is that you really want to do, what excites you, and just following your nose, really.
Follow your curiosity. Yeah. And how did you, and so what kind of work, can you give a sort of introduction to Leading Systemically? Like what kind of work do you guys kind of do? And yeah, how do you find your clients is also kind of interesting.
You find your clients through, my experience anyway, so you got 2 options.
Yeah.
So option 1 is you go build a big company. And I know, well, not big by KPMG standard, but you go and build a company, you go and hire some people to go and do business development for you, hire some people to run your back office, and you go and to scale and look to see if you can generate several $1 million worth of revenue, and off you go. That's never been something that's particularly interested me because I enjoy doing the work. And so I don't want to spend a lot of my time, a big proportion of my time doing business development and running the back office and just sitting there and, do we need to move office now and all that sort of stuff. I don't want to do that stuff. I don't want to be the CEO. I want to be someone who's out delivering. And so your option 2 is you're running something that's deliberately quite small. You can still attain a certain size because when you know your market well, you know other practitioners well, you can do the big jobs because you can bring other people in. But I'm not trying to build a big company. What I'm doing is trying to create something that gives me the space to do what I enjoy doing. So that's my kind of, I can't remember what the question was now.
Yeah, that was part of the question. And then also the second part of the question is, how do you sort of find customers? Is it just kind of...
It's by you see, that's the thing. If you build up a big company, you hire business. No, there's a coaching company and a couple of coaching companies I know in Sydney that do that. They hire their biz dev folks to go out there and find the business. That's not really what I do. Again, after you've been in the market for a while, you know people in the market, you stay in contact, you go and have a coffee every now and again, you see what they're after, understanding the market through their eyes will determine to a great extent the kind of products that you're developing and how you present yourself to market. If you do work for those people and they like the work, they'll tell their friends, and so it's by referral.
And is there any sort of, I guess, conflict of interest? Because I guess some of the roles that you've previously done are still sort of very similar to what you are doing now for your own company. So does it...
They certainly can be. That to me is about just integrity, really. I mean, when I was doing work with Lyco, for example, I was also doing work for myself. So of course you could theoretically end up looking for the same client through to, but you're just open and transparent with people, number one, and number two, you choose the people that you work with well. That perhaps sounds a little easier said than done, but I've never found it terribly difficult. I mean, yeah, you work with people who you really trust and you get on with, and you commit to be really open and transparent and so on, and that all feels like a pretty adult way of working to me.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, because I'd imagine that sometimes, especially when you're working for yourself, and if business is not going good, you could be tempted to, I guess, pick up an old customer from somewhere you used to work from. But
yeah, but as I said, this is about being adult, and I think by the time you get to be our age, then you don't do that sort of thing.
yeah, good stuff. Good morals, Paul. So the big question is, what does it mean to lead systemically? Can you give us a kind of introduction?
Yeah, leading systemically. So when I said, I've done a lot of work in the coaching space, and the research I did originally in the coaching space was kind of technical stuff around coaching, like how do you run a three-way meeting between coachee and line manager? How long should you leave between sessions? What does the evidence tell us about giving feedback? And I did a lot of qualitative research around all that stuff. And coaching is not that. It hasn't been around that long. So that research was of great practical use to people who were in the field of coaching. What I subsequently found was going to coaching conferences started to be a bit dull because you were just hearing the same old stuff. And so what I then became interested in, and that the part of the issue with coaching as an industry is it's determined to become a profession, which is just weird for me. I mean, and the argument for becoming a profession is to protect organizations from cowboy practitioners. Well, that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is you just, as organizations, you get to understand about coaching. I think as a big organization seeking to use coaches, you ought to know a bit about coaching and find out a bit about coaching such that you can tell who the cowboy practitioners are and you don't use them. The problem with becoming professional is the traditional profession is around putting walls around things. Which says this is coaching and that's not coaching, and you've got to be good at coaching. It's not being a doctor. The problem with that is it puts walls around coaching, and you become blind to all the really interesting stuff that sits outside coaching that can be really useful inside coaching. And that's why I did a counselling and therapy degree, was there were so many lovely little models in there that are useful in coaching. Well, what I started doing about 2-3 years ago was got really interested in the whole literature around systems theory, because a lot of coaches talk, I'm systemic. A lot of the leadership programs these days encourage people to be systemic. They don't really define what that means. And so I thought, well, what does it mean? So I went and explored the kind of systems theory stuff and found that there's lots of different ways of thinking about systems. If you say you're systemic, doesn't mean very much. All it really means is I just climb to the 10th floor of the hotel and have a look at a broader view than if I walk around the streets. But actually systems theories are not about taking a broader view. It's about how do you interpret what you see? And there's lots of different ways of doing it. And so I wrote a book called Coaching Systemically, 5 Ways of Thinking About Systems. And that was really well received, and I found it really useful. And then what I also found was, wow, this stuff is actually probably more interesting to leaders than it is to coaches. I mean, at the end of the day, as a coach, what are you trying to do? You're trying to have a good influence on organizations and society and what have you. Well, go direct to leaders. And so I thought, yeah, we need to take these kind of messages straight to leaders. And through that, Leading Systemically was born. And Leading Systemically offers programs. We have a kind of flagship program called The Wise Leader. and I'm currently writing a book with a colleague called The Wise Leader. It's got a coaching skills programs, and our coaching skills programs are based on a really good, solid understanding of how change works. It's not just about offering people models. It's about, that's not our purpose. Our purpose is actually to support sustainable behavioral change. And we have a program around teaming excellence. How do you actually help teams become more effective? So those are our kind of 3 flagship service products. And of course, we do lots of coaching and what have you.
And how do you generally deliver your services? Is it kind of like pre-filmed video form, or you mainly do like one-to-one, or like in person, or online, or seminars, or however?
So one of the things we haven't really talked about is what's underpinned my kind of practice probably for the last 6-7 years was a piece of research I did on change, where I talked to 50 leaders around the world around, never mind what gets in the way of change, what in your experience, and I'm talking to business leaders here, I'm not talking to AD folks, business leaders, tell me about change. And these were, half of these folks were CEOs, it was a global community. Tell me about change that worked and what made it work. And what came out of that was a whole bunch of insights around how change really happens. And those insights kind of underpin the design of all our programs. And it recognizes that if you can set what's using these purely virtual media to transmit information is fine. If you need to understand your obligations as an employee in the safety space, for example, we can do that online, no problem. It's really kind of information download presented in a way that's easy to understand. If you're in the game of sustainable behavioral change, which you are in the coaching space, the teaming space, the leadership space, this isn't about intellectual stuff. You can teach somebody intellectually what it means to be a different leader. Don't expect that leader to change terribly much just through sharing that video. What people need to work, because people have their own established habits based on their own established mindsets. That's what determines how people behave. So if you want to introduce people to a new idea, what you're interested in is, and how can you create a space which enables people to change their mindset and change their habits? And to do that, I think you need to create a space with other people where these people can help make sense of the material that you're offering them and help make sense of how do we actually put that into practice in a way that's fundamentally different. And we know all this because we run research programs around a lot of our programs, like with the coaching skills programs. They go for 10 months because we run research alongside these programs that says the real shift for people tends to happen about 5, 6, 7 months. And it tends to happen when people have got other people going through a similar experience with whom they can make sense of the journey. So we do virtual programs and we do face-to-face programs, but they always involve working with groups of people together in an environment where they have the opportunity to talk to and make sense of this stuff together.
That's cool. And also just wondering about so I guess what would you say is your purpose, and how did you sort of go about finding it? It's something that you're very passionate about.
Well, if you want to know what you're passionate about, there's 2 ways. One, just look back at your life so far and say, well, what was it that really interested me? That's number 1. Number 2, ask yourself that question when the alarm goes off in the morning. How are you feeling about the day ahead? Are you feeling excited, or are you feeling a bit, and on the days when you're feeling excited, what is it you're feeling excited about doing? That's a very practical way of understanding what it is that you're currently in the world for. And it's an ongoing exercise, because once you've found your purpose, don't imagine it's not going to change, because it will change. So to me, it's about constantly tuning into what is it that I appear to be attracted to doing. And if I look at what I'm attracted to doing, it's all about it kind of started with helping individuals, but what I realized, and that's why I did a lot of one-to-one coaching, what I kind of came to realize was you can work with people one-to-one, but then off they go back into their work environment. And that work environment largely shapes what happens next. So if you want to really change things, you kind of have to work at the team, group, organization level. And that's why for the last 3 years, I've been doing like 3 days a week in a KPMG Australia, because it's an opportunity to actually work with one client at quite a deep level over a long period of time. So that kind of captures for me my purpose. And as I said, and how do you get to know what your purpose is? Like I said, just check in with yourself.
Yeah.
What excites you? What do you enjoy doing?
Yeah. And also curious, how did you sort of, I guess, end up contracting with KPMG? Like, was it like through word of mouth, or how did they find you and then connect?
Well, like I said, you in a field like I work in, it is quite important. Well, I think it's quite important to grow your own brand. And so I've been doing I do a lot of research and writing and podcasts and webinars and conferences all around the kind of stuff I've been talking about. KPMG just found me on LinkedIn and said, would you like to come and do some work with us? And I said, yeah, all right.
Oh, wow. Awesome. And then you said one of the practical ways of finding out like what you're passionate about is asking about yourself, like whether or not you're excited to wake up in the morning for the day ahead. So I was wondering, for you, does that still work for you? Like, you know, on a Monday morning, are you jumping out of bed or whatever?
To me, I'm just tuned into myself all the time, and I'm feeling excited, I'm feeling motivated, I'm feeling curious, or I'm not. I'm feeling a bit flat, and that will just shift and change, because your purpose will shift and change as you get older, as you learn more about the world. The way that you think will shift and change. So it's a constant process. And for me, it's not just when I get up in the morning. I mean, it's generally speaking, during the day, I'm pretty full on and just enjoying myself. If I get to a part of the day where I'm just suddenly feeling a bit flat, I'll go, right, what's that about? What is it that I'm doing that I'm not enjoying? What is it that's missing?
Okay. And just wondering, for you, on a 10-point scale, how passionate would you say that you are about your job?
Well, I'm 10, because
Wow.
it's like, I'll fluctuate between 9 and 10. But it's like I said, you because if I drop to a 9, I'll try and work out what it is why I'm not a 10. And we all have. I've got freedom to pursue whatever paths I want to pursue. Actually, we all have. We may find ourselves saying things like, yeah, but I've got the mortgage, or I've got the kids.
Yeah.
It's too easy to think that. As I said, and I've lived that. We migrated to Australia with 4 kids with no job, and it all worked out. You've got to be happy in your role, and you've got to be happy in what you do, because if you're not, then you won't be spreading a lot of joy and happiness around you. And at the end of the day, when you got family, I think you owe it to yourself to be kind of in that good space, because that's how you're going to be best useful for other people around you too. Whereas, you know, a lot of us do slip into that space of everyone else needs to be right before I think about myself. It doesn't work. You got to be thinking about yourself as well, because if you're not right, the people around you won't be right.
Yeah, that's true. And just conscious of time, we only have a few minutes, so I just have 3 quick questions. So first one's the deep one. So Paul Lawrence, what is the meaning of life for you, in your opinion?
That's the conversation we just had. There's a lovely book by an author whose name I forget every time I try and mention the book. But he wrote a book called The Meaning of Life, or Man's Meaning of Life. And it's a very short book, and it was around a bunch of folks who were in a concentration camp. The kind of bottom line of it for me is Viktor Frankl. The bottom line of it for me is the meaning of life is that thing that it's your purpose. It's that thing that gets you up in the morning. And the meaning of your meaning in life is going to shift, and it's going to change. It's not about trying to find that meaning in life. It's about constantly being tuned into it. Yeah,
that sounds good. So, Paul, if you won the lottery tomorrow, like, what would you change about your life? You've got like infinite finances.
Yeah, I don't think a lot about my finances, but I'm very happy with my finances where they are. So it would be something, yeah, it would be something, maybe, I don't know, maybe I don't know what I'd do, because I'm actually very happy as I am already.
That's the best place to be. And so what is your ideal day in the life? What time do you wake up? What do you do? And how do you like to spend
Well, I like to spend days differently. So that would be my answer to that question.
it? Do you have like a few models? Like maybe like one day you'd like to, because you like a lot of change, right? So can you give any kind of insight into what kind of like common thread they have?
To me, it's about balance. And I remember, see, I do some writing research, and I remember pre-COVID, there'd be days when I go, great, I've got a day at home to just work through some stuff. And if I did that for more than 2 days, I'd go, right, now I need to get out and about. So it's about balance. The biggest thing for COVID for me has been not being able, and I've had, I just have not had, I've been very lucky. I haven't had any issues. I've not had caught COVID. I don't really know anybody who's caught COVID seriously. I haven't lost my job or anything like that. But the most challenging thing for me is I want to get overseas. So I'm going overseas for 6 weeks at the end of May. And again, that's about balance. So to me, it's not so much about what's your ideal day. It's more about kind of how do you get your balance right? And again, that's just about tuning in. Is the balance right? Balance not.
Yeah, that sounds good. Well, we're pretty much at the end of the podcast, Paul. Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed chatting with you.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Karen.